I want to talk to you about what it's like to be a sexual abuse victim or to be married to one. The current system that's in place, the healthcare system, doesn't address the needs of those people. If they go in and they have the courage to actually report what's happened to them and to have an exam conducted, they might get some counseling after the fact, but ongoing services for things that they need, medical treatment, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, all these different things, everything that they have to contend with, that stuff goes largely unaddressed. Most of the time, one of the most complicated issues that they suffer from is post-traumatic stress disorder. I've seen this firsthand, and it's absolutely devastating. You see it in a lot of military veterans who have seen combat, or they've had to go into the service in areas where a lot of bad things are going on, and they witnessed bad things that really scarred them as a person. It left a mark on their soul. And the situation is that because our healthcare system is entirely profit driven, these people, their needs go basically unmet. And you've got people who are walking around with emotional and psychological baggage that isn't being dealt with, and they can't afford to seek treatment. And if they even, make an effort to try to get services and so forth, a lot of the time people give them a hard time. Providers at these clinics and so forth, some of them which receive government grants, things of that nature. You get there and you actually have the courage to tell someone what's happened to you, and then they give you a hard time. They'll, give you issue about, well, you've, got your kids with you can't go into this clinic. Even after I told someone, there's a male provider I spoke to about circumstances that surrounded what was going on with my wife when she was alive that I wasn't aware of, and why I had showed up there to get testing. And despite telling them in vivid detail some of the stuff that I had become aware of, what had been going on, they still gave me a hard time. This was a free community clinic. And I just couldn't believe it, that they would be so heartless as to, basically they denied us service. They denied us service. And me and the kids ended up leaving, and I left them, an internet review reflecting my experience, and I found out that other people had issue with these providers. They feel like because they're offering a service that's free, it's paid for by grants or community money, some of the time, that they can really mistreat the people that are coming in there. They feel like they have some kind of advantage over them. And so the situation is that those people who are already victims are being victimized again by the same people that are supposed to be helping them. And that victimization is through the treatment and the hard time, essentially, that they're getting from those providers. I'm not saying this is always the case, but more often than not, when you go to community health clinics, they're not being paid a preferential rate that they want. And as a result, you get an inferior quality of care, unfortunately. Private pay pays better. But what I'm finding out is that even if you tell people what's happened to you, that you've been a victim, or that someone that you know was a victim and you suffered consequences as a result, that doesn't guarantee you any help. In fact, people really don't even seem to care about what's going on for those people. They they're like, oh, it sucks for you. Basically, take a walk it off, essentially. And I'm not specifically talking strictly about, men or women, but I'll tell you, if you are male and you go to tell somebody what's happened to you, especially being white, they automatically have all these stigmatizations and assumptions that they make based off of you being male and white. And I'm not saying that discrimination doesn't occur against the other groups. What I am implying is that those people that have these assumptions that they make, they're not going to outright tell you why they're coming to these conclusions just from looking at you. But they don't know who you are just from looking. They don't know what you've been through. And they don't care either. That's the thing. That's what I've realized. And you go around and you're trying to get services. I'd called a number just to see what would happen, to find out, well, what exactly would they refer me to if I was a potential victim. And I was seeking services. I called as a hypothetical patient. And what I found out is that in one case, because I was male, I suspect, I called a service number, it's like a national hotline, and they referred me over to a battered women's shelter 5 hours away from where I was at, literally on the other side of the state. And I asked them, well, do you have these services available there? And not only could they not tell me where to go to get services, like testing, but they hung up on me. And I called back, and the second person I talked to, which was another woman, couldn't tell me anything either. So for months, I was going around seeing what kind of experience other potential victims have. What I found out is that if you can't pay for testing, at least like $10 or $20, testing wasn't even available. There were basically no charitable resources that were entirely free for people seeking testing and services. And in most of the cases where these people need services, they're housing insecure, or they're entirely homeless, they're living out of their car or living under a bridge somewhere. They're having to work as sex workers or prostitutes. Not always, but a lot of the time, just so they can pay their basic bills for food, for housing, all of it. I've seen this firsthand. I spent several months living in motels, several different motels, when we became housing insecure. And the victims can't get services, especially psychiatric services, medication, dental. Usually they end up, a lot of the time without any teeth. They've got real bad dental problems. They end up on drugs. I'm not saying all the time, but this is the average that I've seen. And consequently of using the drugs, they end up with all kinds of other health problems. Sometimes hepatitis. Sometimes, they'll have like chronic illness. More often than not, chronic illness, respiratory illness, immunosuppression. And they do illegal street drugs, not all of them, but some of them, largely to cope emotionally and psychologically, and to kind of disassociate themselves from the identity that was abused. There's a lot of really complex psychiatric problems that emerge for those people. And they usually can't get assistance with housing, and if they do get assistance, it's temporary. There's no longevity to the assistance. There's no lasting support. And these people need support sometimes for years, if not for their entire lives, from the community health resources that are there. And for anybody to give you a hard time when you're going to seek services after having something like that happen to you, you know, it varies from person to person what the impacts are. But I can tell you, I've lived with someone and they were just absolutely devastated completely. I mean, there were so many problems that this person had, and I wasn't aware of what had happened. And so it wasn't even a problem that I could address directly because I was sitting there treating the symptoms for this person. And they did not, they weren't even aware of some of the problems they had because their problems were so severe in nature. When Ronald Reagan was president and he defunded mental health care in the United States, that was really a landmark deterioration for people from families like that. And there are health problems that they suffer from that go beyond just what happened to them a lot of the time. At some point I'm going to get into that in full explanation. But basically they have no housing support, they have no medical care, they have no psychiatric care, they have usually no utilities assistance. If they move into a shelter, they're probably going to have to worry about having their clothing or other little bits that they have, you know, if they happen to be lucky enough to have a phone or some nice shoes maybe, or something that they covet. Heck, even a necklace or a bracelet or a jewelry, if they have any jewelry, you know, whatever little that they have. These things, they have to worry about these things getting stolen from them. That happens a lot in those places. And the shelters assume no responsibility. But, I mean, I'm sure that basically the people, they're lucky to have anything at all after going through that situation. They're lucky to even be alive. Because a lot of the time the victims don't survive. They're killed by their victimizers, the perpetrators. And it's terrible because they live with the trauma of what's happened to them, and they can't get services or treatment. They can't get what they need. And that's tragic because the kind of harm that those people have come to is so devastating. The lasting impacts, you know, some people, they can kind of move on and put it behind them, but you never really feel the same about people again after something like that's happened to you. And it's mind-blowing to me that there's such a lack of compassion and empathy for these people because they've been through the ringer. But I've seen what it's like firsthand. You know, they don't have enough food, they don't have housing, they don't have health care, can't pay their bills. The tragedy of it is that they usually end up having to move back in with the abuser or abusers in order to survive. And because of all the insecurity they suffer from, they also generally suffer from codependency. So they feel like they have to have somebody with them as a companion in order to cope emotionally and psychologically with just living every day. It's a cycle, just like they say it is. But we need to get protections in place for those people, and I've written a lot of congressmen, government representatives concerning the experience that I've had with all of this, and it has been one where largely you don't receive any response at all. A lot of the time your correspondence is ignored entirely, and the community at large, you know, Most people just go, oh, it sucks for you. Well, it could happen to anybody. These things that happen to these people could happen to anyone. The circumstances, all you have to do is be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or be born into the wrong family. You don't get to pick who your parents are. You don't get to pick the family you're born into. You know. That's how it is.